I am ready when you are.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the January 2025 meeting of the Botetourt County Board of Supervisors. We're glad to see you here. Our first order of business is to come out of closed session. We were about the past 90 minutes or so, we were in closed session across the hall. And we have a protocol to go through to come out of closed session, and that's what I am going to do. If I can find the statement to that effect. Up there. Okay, this is just a short statement. This is required following a closed session per the Code of Virginia. And a roll call vote is required on this item. So here's the resolution. Be it resolved that to the best of each board member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements, and only such matters as were identified in the motion to go into closed session were heard, discussed, or considered during the closed session. Go ahead.
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we are out of closed session. We'll have Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Nicely will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now, as we traditionally do, I'll ask that we join in a moment of silence to reflect on whatever interests us, whatever seems appropriate individually, for a quick moment of silence. Thank you. One minor change to our overall agenda today. There was a public hearing advertised for this evening associated with the Planning Commission. That's been tabled, so we will not have an evening meeting today. This is, of course, a January meeting, and it's when we have the board reorganization. So I will turn matters over to Mr. LaRue, our county administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always a pleasure to be in front of you. Well, it's most of the time it's a pleasure to be in front of you, but no, seriously, I really appreciate this opportunity. And on an annual basis at this time of the year, we end up doing the reorganization of the board, as you're well aware, and so the public can understand what's going on. So each year, the chairmanship may rotate to another member, and so it's elected each year annually, and then the same for the vice chair. And so what I will end up doing is asking for nominations in just a moment for the chair, and then we would, if there are multiple nominations, then we would end up voting in reverse order for that chair position until we end up with a new chair. At that point, I would turn the microphone back over to the new chair, who would end up going through the process of electing the vice chair. And then I think you have on your list of other things to do is about the committee, commissions, and board appointments. And that is a massive list that each one of you have share responsibility and end up taking those roles very seriously throughout the year. hundreds, thousands of hours are placed toward those activities. And we certainly do appreciate you representing Botetourt in so many different ways. So that would be there. Then it would be the adoption of the potential of the revised bylaws. And then it would be the adoption of the board meeting schedule as listed on item 2. So any questions? If not, then what I would end up doing is asking for a nomination for the position of chair.
Nominate Amy White.
Second.
Okay, there has been a nomination and a second for Amy White. Are there other nominations? Hearing no nominations, I'll go again. No nominations. Hearing no nominations, then we would need to vote on Ms. White being chair for 25, year 25. And so Celeste, would you do a roll call vote?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Okay. Madam Chair, as we, before I turn this back over to you, I would end up saying a heartfelt appreciation to Mr. Clinton, who has been the chair for this past year. It has been absolutely wonderful working with you, and I appreciate everything that you've done and bringing just common sense, bringing academic knowledge to the table, professional benefits of engineering past, and just amazing opportunity to work with you. And I would not want this time to go past without saying that publicly. So, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you to my board members. I will work my hardest to work with each of you and to continue the good work that this board is currently doing and has historically done. I would like to echo what Mr. LaRue said about Chairman Clinton. It's been an honor to work with you. I think we still have a lot to learn from you, and appreciate all that you have given to this county and this board. So thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is to elect a vice chair, and I would like to nominate Dr. Scott Horn.
Second.
Move the nominations to be closed.
We have a motion and a second, and nominations have been moved to be closed. Therefore, we will take a vote. Do we need a roll call vote for this? Ms. Parker, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Our next item is to go through our committee, commission, board appointments. This is rather lengthy. It is in your packet. I hope everybody sees the draft that we have here. We're going to go through those one by one to kind of see if these people want to continue or if we want to make some changes. So please speak up. I will call on each position. The next one to be appointed is the Roanoke Regional Partnership Board of Directors. The meetings, there are 2 meetings a year. I'm currently slated to go to those. I'm happy to continue unless someone else would like to do that.
Madam Chair, I think by definition, that falls to the chair normally
Okay.
anyway. Normally.
Okay.
And so this year was an anomaly to that, but
Okay,
So-
perfect. And do I go through all these and we vote once at the end? Or do we vote on
you can
each
vote
one?
on those individually or as a group if you choose to do so.
Okay, we'll just have a voice vote by each one. So I move that I continue with the Roanoke Regional Partnership.
Can second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Michael is currently serving on the Social Services Board. Mr. Michael, do you want to continue with that?
Yes, please.
I move that Mr. Michael continue with the Social Services Board.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Michael. Dr. Scott Horn, you're currently on Parks and Recreation Commission. Would you like to continue with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else interested in that position? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for Dr. Scott Horn to serve on the Parks and Recreation Commission. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Nicely currently serves on the Planning Commission. Would you like to continue that?
Yes, ma'am.
Would anyone else like to be considered to serve on the Planning Commission?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for Mr. Nicely to serve on the Planning Commission. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Clinton is currently serving on the Library Board of Trustees.
I'd be pleased to continue.
Excellent.
Second. So moved.
Motion, Dr. Scott Horn, a second, Mr. Michael, for Mr. Clinton to continue serving on the Library Board of Trustees. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Michael currently serves on the Transportation Safety Committee. Your thoughts, Mr. Michael?
Yes, but as a point of reference, we are thinking about disbanding that.
At like a regional level or?
Yeah.
Okay. So would
But,
you like to serve until it's disbanded?
I'll finish it up so we can get it off the books.
Super. Thank you. I move that Mr. Michael continues with the Transportation Safety Committee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Michael also serves on the TAP Board of Directors. Mr. Michael, your thoughts on continuing?
Okay, we have forwarded that to the lady at the bank, and she seems to be doing a good job, so I'd like to reappoint her.
I don't know if that requires a board member or not.
Okay, I'll continue until we get that resolved.
Okay.
So we have, I'll make a motion that Mr. Michael continue with the TAP Board of Directors. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other one interested in that position? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. Next is the Economic Development Authority. Dr. Scott Horn currently serves on that authority. Would you like to continue?
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else interested in serving on the EDA? Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second that Dr. Scott Horn continue with the EDA. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Nicely and Mr. Michael are currently on the Fire and EMS Committee. Would you all be okay with continuing that service?
Yes, please.
Anyone else?
So moved.
Have a motion
Second.
and a second for Mr. Nicely and Mr. Michael to serve on the Fire and EMS Committee. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Currently, I and Mr. Clinton serve on the Regional Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission, Transportation Planning Organization Policy Board, and the Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission. Those are two appointments. We've both been doing those. I am willing to continue with that. Mr. Clinton?
I choose to step down from that.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to assume that responsibility? Mr. Nicely, would you like to join me in that capacity?
Yes.
Thank you. Do I have a motion
Motion.
and a second?
Second.
Fantastic. That would be Ms. White and Mr. Nicely serving on the Transportation Planning Organization Policy Board and the Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. Mr. Clinton serves on the Regional Commission SEDS work group. Mr. Clinton, would you be willing to continue with that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for Mr. Clinton to continue with the SEDS group. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. The Agricultural Projects Committee, Mr. Nicely and Mrs. White. Mr. Nicely, would you like to continue?
Yes.
Anyone else interested in doing that work? I'm happy to continue as well. So can I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for Mr. Nicely and Mrs. White to continue with the Agricultural Projects Committee. Mr. Clinton is currently serving on the Historic Greenfield Advisory Committee. Your thoughts, Mr. Clinton?
I'll continue on that.
Any other interest in that? Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Clinton will continue with the Historic Greenfield Advisory Committee. The next page. Mr. Clinton, you currently serve on the BCCC Historic Properties Committee. Would you like to continue that work?
I will do so.
Anyone else interested? Do I have a motion
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Clinton. And two more to go for you. The Botetourt Museum Committee.
I'll continue on that.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Clinton will continue on the Botetourt Museum Committee. The Virginia 250 Committee. Mr. Clinton?
Yes, ma'am. I'll go with that.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Anyone else interested there? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Clinton. All board members serve on the General Fund Budget Committee, the General Fund Budget Subcommittee. Currently, Mr. Clinton and Mrs. White. I'm going to step down from the Budget Subcommittee. Do we have interest in serving on that subcommittee or any nominations?
I'll continue on it in my role.
Super.
And one more.
I would nominate Mr. Michael.
I accept.
So we have Mr. Clinton and Mr. Michael on the General Fund Budget Subcommittee. Any other nominations? Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. The School Budget Subcommittee is currently Mr. Nicely and Mr. Michael. Mr. Michael, would you want to do both, or do you want to come off the school?
I'd like to stay on school.
You'd like to stay on school, Mr. Nicely?
Yes.
You want to stay on school. So anyone else interested in the School Budget Committee? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So the motion is seconded that Mr. Nicely and Mr. Michael serve on the School Budget Committee. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That carries. We don't need to vote on the clerk and the parliamentarians. We do need to vote on the clerk. Okay. So parliamentarians are Mr. LaRue and Mr. Lockaby. Currently, do I have a motion to go forward?
So moved.
Second.
So the motion is for Mr. LaRue and Mr. Lockaby to continue as parliamentarians. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. LaRue currently serves as clerk to the board. Would we like to entertain a motion for that to continue?
So move.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second for Mr. LaRue to serve as clerk to the board in 2025. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And our last one, the deputy clerk to the board. I would like to nominate Ms. Celeste Parker to serve in that role.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That portion of our reorganization is now complete. The next agenda item is to adopt the revised bylaws, which are found in the packet. You may take a look at them if you haven't already. Do we have any discussion or questions about the revisions to the bylaws?
Madam Chair, I move for approval.
We have a motion to approve
Second.
and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And our last bit of bookkeeping in this section, to adopt a board meeting schedule. The board will meet the fourth Tuesday of each month, except in December when we will meet on December 16th, 2025, which is the third Tuesday. That is to avoid the holiday, the Christmas holiday.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. And with that, we are reorganized and ready to do our business and our work in the upcoming calendar year. Thank you all so much for your patience through that. I'd like to go now to item number 3, introductions and recognitions. First, Blake Winan, please come on down. I think you have 2 introductions to make. Welcome, Blake.
Good afternoon, members of the board. First, I would like to introduce Jeff Lambert. Jeff was hired this month as a custodian. He is a lifelong Botetourt County resident and comes to us from Botetourt County Schools. Jeff has over 30 years of custodial experience. He is the custodian for both the administration building and the VWCC classroom building. He has adapted quickly to the buildings and to the many tasks that are required to provide a clean space for everyone who comes through the doors. We are very happy to have Jeff on the board as part of the maintenance team.
Thank you and welcome. Thank you so much for your work.
And secondly, I would like to introduce Brandon Briner. Brandon was hired in December as a maintenance tech 1. He and his wife recently relocated to the Roanoke area from Oregon. Brandon brings 8+ years of electrical and general maintenance experience to the BoCo team. He has made an immediate impact in the maintenance department, and we are very happy to have him. So
Thank you so much and welcome to you both. We're thrilled to have you on board and appreciate your work. Thank you. Mr. Morales, you have an introduction, I believe.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank
Welcome,
you.
everybody. I'm very excited to introduce Jamie Thatcher over here to my left. She is our new Community Recreation Coordinator for the Parks and Recreation Department. This is a new position that was approved by the board for expanding our programming as a county. Traditionally, over the last few years, we have a very strong youth sports program. So this position is to focus on the non-traditional youth sports, allowing for all demographics, all age groups to have access to programming in outdoor recreation, fitness, as well as leisure. So one really exciting thing about Jamie is that she really brings a well-rounded, kind of holistic approach to recreation and wellness. She is a certified personal trainer, yoga instructor, as well as a level 2 coastal kayaking instructor as well. Her experience stretches very far and broad for people of 4 years old up to 90 years old and all around, which is very exciting to us as well. She used to work as a civilian adaptive sports specialist for Camp Lejeune for their Wounded Warriors Battalion. She's also been working over at St. Croix over at, that's the drink, St. Croix, Virgin Islands as a beach programming manager for families over at a resort there. She used to work at the YMCA right here in Daleville as their wellness director, really kind of setting them up for success in their personal training and their fitness programming there. Most recently, she worked at Retirement Unlimited, where they were up and down the entire East Coast. She helped 60 different coaches throughout the entire East Coast on their programming for senior citizens and adult care. So we're very excited to see what she brings to the table. Both her and I have experience in outdoor recreation and fitness, and we're excited to utilize these natural resources that are here in Botetourt County and really put programming available for all demographics, all socioeconomic statuses and age groups. And I'm just very excited to have her on staff.
Thank you and welcome.
Welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. This is something I think our county has kind of longed for and has been in the planning for a long time. And it's so great to see this realized. And we look forward to what programming you'll bring. And I just welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. And Mr. McCoy has an introduction for us today.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Mr. David Deering, who is our new code enforcement officer. Mr. Deering worked for the city of Roanoke for 30 years, impacting the city residents there with his work with the GIS program. We're very excited to have Mr. Deering on board. He's made an immediate impact, not only in his work products, but also in his height. He's brought in the average height of our office up several inches, so we do appreciate that. He's working part-time Tuesday through Thursday. So if you have any concerns or if anybody in the public has any concerns, please pass them along. He'll be out in the community taking pictures and doing some code enforcement. So if there's anything, if you see him out, say hello. He's very friendly. He does not bite, as far as I know. And we just very much appreciate him being on board. So thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome. Wait. Must get your picture. It's not official till we have the picture. While we're doing that, we're going to turn to agenda item number 4. And Mr. Clinton will talk us through the Botetourt resolutions of 1775.
Thank you, ma'am. This is, I think as everybody has perceived, just in newspapers and community discussions and so on, this is an eventful year in terms of Botetourt's history because it marks the 250th anniversary of the Botetourt resolutions, which in effect is the 250th anniversary of America, at least in my opinion. We have a resolution that we'd like to present. And as soon as I can find it here. And I will say that as a guest who's going to have a comment to make in just a moment, Mr. Ed Holt, who's the chair of the Botetourt County Historical Museum. This is the first exclusively Botetourt public event during this calendar year in recognition of the 250th anniversary of the Botetourt resolutions. So we have a proclamation that I'm going to read. Then I would ask Mr. Holt to make a few comments. and then I'll submit the resolution for board approval. So here's the proclamation. Significant in U.S. history. Whereas March 11th, 2025 marks the 250th anniversary of the publication of the Botetourt resolutions, instructions from the freeholders of Botetourt County to express their gratitude to Representatives Andrew Lewis and John Boyer from Botetourt to the Second Virginia Convention, pledging opposition to the British government suppressing the rights of American colonial settlers and the imposition of taxation without representation. And whereas it is fitting and proper to accord official recognition to this document, the Botetourt resolutions, in promoting the cause of freedom from tyranny and its memorable anniversary, and to the patriotic celebrations which will commemorate the occasion. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Botetourt County, Virginia does hereby proclaim the week of March 9th through 15th as Botetourt Resolutions Week. And we ask our citizens to affirm the ideals of the Botetourt County freeholders expressed in 1775, 250 years ago, in pledging their guns, tomahawks, and lives to the cause of liberty by vigilantly protecting the freedoms they and their forebears enjoyed, remembering that lost rights may never be regained. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Botetourt County Board of Supervisors recognizes March 9th through 15th as Botetourt Resolutions Week. So I submit that to the board for consideration. Then Mr. Holt will have some comments and I'll have some final comments. So I submit that we recognize March 19th through 15th, 2025 as Botetourt Resolutions Week.
Mr. Holt.
Esteemed lady and gentlemen, my name is Ed Holt. I'm a resident of the Amsterdam Magisterial District, and I'm here today representing the Botetourt County Historical Society as well as the Botetourt County chapter of the DAR, who are sponsoring a commemoration event for the Botetourt resolutions. We've provided you with a copy. They're short and sweet. These resolutions in the country started after the Boston Tea Party and the crackdown by the British government. The ones here that we've just recently celebrated, the Fincastle resolutions in Roanoke, that was Fincastle County, nothing to do with their Fincastle. These were our resolutions. They came afterwards. And they were the first to pledge lives to the cause of freedom. They were late in the process because our men had been off at the Battle of Point Pleasant and Dunmore's War, which resulted in a treaty with several indigenous peoples, tribes, trying not to say the other I word, that kept them out of the war for the first 3 years and probably contributed a huge amount to the revolution succeeding because we didn't have to fight a two-front war in the East and the West. That battle occurred in what was then Botetourt County, and half or more of the troops were from Botetourt County. We had an event in October celebrating that. But what we're looking at doing on Friday, March 14th at 7 p.m., having a short play we've written depicting the events from basically Point Pleasant to the Declaration of Independence. And we're going to do this in 20 minutes or so, and our place in it. These resolutions, these actions by men from Botetourt were important as they were in other places across the country in making this a nation. We're going to have costumed reenactors. Our executive director, Lindsay Alley's been working with April Easton, who's head of social studies in the schools, to have some activities for the appropriate level in the schools. If you adopt this, and we want to make a big deal of it. It's going to be at the Kyle House. And we will also have the resolutions to hand out there. We'll have a reception afterwards in the Kyle House. Heavy hors d'oeuvres. We'll charge a small fee of $10 to attend. And do you have any questions I can address? I'm not a great speaker, so I've left out probably half of what's on my sheet. So,
March 14th, Kyle House, right?
Yes, sir. Friday night, and we will have Robin Reed will be the narrator. Tommy Moore will read the resolutions and send Colonel Lewis and John Boyer off to Richmond. One of the things we are producing is a map of Botetourt in 1775. And my guess is nobody here's ever seen it. I haven't. We see the big one originally, and the next one we see is the 1821 map. But at this time, Botetourt basically went from just north of Lexington to the New River and west to the Ohio River. And I've never seen that map. I don't think anybody else has. So we're working with some professors and some grad students at Virginia Tech to produce that. I'll have that. So anything we can do, let me know. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
We need to.
Thank you so much, Mr. Holt, for that information. Again, just to make sure everybody heard that, March 14th, 7 p.m. at the Kyle House, there will be a self-written play that is produced by our citizens that will bring further attention, worthy attention to this act. Mr. Clinton has presented this resolution before the board for consideration. Is there any discussion? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this resolution. That is Botetourt Resolutions Week, March 9 through 15, 2025. All in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you. And I think Mr. Clinton would like to follow up with a comment.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. In the resolution, the resolution contained at least one sort of quaint word. I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but the representatives who went to the General Assembly back in 1775 with the Botetourt resolutions, they were motivated by the sense of death to tyranny, basically. But one of the quaint things I think in the resolution itself, and I sort of highlighted this, they pledged their guns, tomahawks, and lives to the cause of liberty. And not many people these days have tomahawks, but I'm glad to say that I happen to have a tomahawk. And this was beautifully crafted and authentically reproduced by our friend and very influential historian in Botetourt County, Danny Kyle. Danny made this for me several years ago. And I saw that in the resolution and thought, well, I can claim it. I've got a real tomahawk here. So just adds to some of the symbolism, and my appreciation, Ed, to you and to the board for passing it.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Danny.
I didn't see that coming, but I'm glad it did. That was really cool. Thank you, Mr. Clinton, and thank you for your craftsmanship. Next, we have item number 5, our citizen comment period. If anyone would like to speak specifically to agenda items that are upcoming in today's meeting, please come forward. I don't have any written requests, but I will ask the audience for anyone who would like to speak to agenda items. Seeing none, we will move on to our consent agenda, which contains our minutes from previous meetings. I trust that everyone has reviewed those. Are there any questions on that?
Move for approval.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Davis, we will move on to agenda item numbers 7 and 8. First, the approval of transfers and additional appropriations.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the board. So for the month of January, we have 2 transfer requests. Both are to move funds in alignment with the updated project needs for various maintenance capital projects. Additionally, there are 4 pass-through appropriations. The first is to appropriate funds to the jail related to medical reimbursements, Social Security incentive, TAP coordination fees, and fingerprints. The second is to appropriate VDEM dispatch training grant funds to dispatch. The next one is to appropriate items related to miscellaneous reimbursements, fees, grant funds, donations, and contract payments to the sheriff's office. And the final item is to appropriate funds to fire EMS for a donation. This month, we have no regular appropriations. Are there any questions I can answer at this time?
Any questions for Ms. Davis? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the approval of transfers and additional appropriations. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. On to number 8, the approval of accounts payable and ratification of the short accounts payable list.
So for the month of, for this month, the total AP is $2,378,959.83. Don't forget the change. As mentioned in last month's meeting, due to the holiday schedule and the earlier board meeting, we do have an additional AP run to be ratified this month. So that amount is slightly higher than normal because of that. Notable disbursements included $73,000 for IT subscription software related to cybersecurity, $250,000 for the purchase of 5 Ford Police Interceptor utility vehicles, $50,000 for the repair to a motor on engine 2, $100,000 as the third quarter contribution to the health department, and finally $50,000 related to the Reed Mountain fire/911 dispatch project. So any questions at this time?
Questions for Ms. Davis?
If there's no questions, Madam Chairman, I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. I'd like to bring down Mr. Blevins now from VDOT for our monthly update.
Madam Chair, Board, thank you for having me again this month. For our update, again, we're waiting on our new resurfacing schedules to start. It'll be later in the spring. As for our one traffic engineering work order, it's still under review. So nothing really new there. As far as our site plan reviews, we have several under review so far. If you have any questions about any of those, I'd be happy to respond to any of those. We had about 10 permits issued this month, mostly private entrances and utility permits. As for the VDOT project that's underway right now out at International Parkway in 220, the update here that I have said that it would be probably the middle of February before we get that back open and the work zone removed. I've been told that's actually going to happen a little faster, maybe this week, maybe early next week. I actually saw them removing some of the temporary tape when I came in. So they look like they're pretty close to opening back up again, which means they'll only do some temporary like lane closures during the days after that's done. And everything looked pretty good when I drove through, so I don't see why they wouldn't make that that schedule changed after I sent this out. I think they got a few good days of good weather after our snow and cold, and was able to finish some things up. As for planned routine maintenance work, we've done a lot of grading gravel roads and debris cleanup from our secondary routes from the storms that we've had. Mostly over the last month, we've been working on snow or hoping that it won't snow. Aside from that, that's all I really have for this month. I'll be happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your work. I know the weather, since we saw you last, has been a bit challenging. But thank you for that. I feel like we got back to business as quickly as we could. Anything from Blue Ridge?
No, we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fincastle?
Good, thanks.
Amsterdam?
We're good.
Valley?
Yes, just an update. Hunter's Green, Highland Manor.
Yeah, it's still going through with our paving schedules. Thankfully, it's going out with those. Hopefully, we'll get good bids as a part of that, since it's a district-wide kind of bid. We should know more maybe by the end of February. They usually do construction pre-cons in early March, and then start immediately thereafter, or at least sometime during the paving season. So I'll have more information maybe next month, possibly in March.
Thank you. And the only thing I would add, again, weather related, I feel like the wind has also been particularly bad, as well as the temperatures. But what is your plan when, can you just explain to us what you do when we have these pretty significant winds, trees down in the roads? What's the best way for us to correspond with you? And then what do you do in response to that?
Right. So if you have a tree down or something, the best way to get with us is to call the 1-800 number online. It's 1-800-4-ROAD, 367-7623. I'm available, and most of you have my cell phone number, but I may not be the fastest person to get it to someone. That 1-800 number will go to the call center, and the call center is actually here local, and they transfer that to the TOC if the road's blocked, and our transportation operations center will call someone out. We have folks on call that will make that happen. If it's a bad enough event, or like if we're in snow operations, we're probably in 24-hour operations anyway, which they'll just call them directly and they'll already be there. But at least for a random event like the wind we've had today, if there's a tree down, generally calling the TOC, they'll call someone out.
And I feel like sometimes people take care of it themselves, but it ends up pushed over, and then that is what needs to be cleaned up. It's not like blocking, but it's impeding traffic.
Yeah, and in all honesty, sometimes if we have a bad event and there's a lot of tree debris, we will miss a few. So if you have any of those, we'd be happy to go back and take care of those if you know of one that maybe has been laying there for a while.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Our next item is to consider a resolution, the Safe Streets for All Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. I don't see anyone listed, but I was going to ask if you folks are going to come down. Thank you, Mr. McCoy.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for having us up here this afternoon. I'm very excited to present to you all the draft Comprehensive Safety Action Plan as a result of the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. This is a federal grant that we received last year, a joint grant with Roanoke County and the town of Vinton, to produce a plan that identifies several of our top priority intersections and road corridors in Botetourt County, and then develop some solutions to address some of the needs there. Today, I've got Mr. Thomas Ruff of the Timmons Group, who we've been working closely with over the past year. He's going to give you a brief presentation, about 15-20 minutes, or as long as you'd like him to speak to you, detailing the plan itself. And at the end, we'd be asking you to pass a resolution in support of that plan. It's not in its final stage yet, but it's about 99% done with just minor tweaks and things that need to be added to the plan. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Mr. Ruff. If you have any questions, he is much more capable than I am in discussing transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you all for the time today to go through this. As you said, my name is Thomas Ruff from the Timmons Group. We're a civil engineering and transportation planning firm located here in Virginia, and we've been working with Botetourt and Roanoke region localities for a number of years. So excited to share this information, and certainly happy to take any questions. And I'll be brief, but certainly, I'll be looking at you all. So if you have anything, if I say a word, something like that, please point me in the right direction. Just quickly, we'll talk through a little bit of what the Safe Streets for All program is, and then some of the specific information for Botetourt County and how we have met some of the goals of the program. So just briefly, about a year, a little over, well, almost 2 years now, Roanoke County and Botetourt and Vinton got together to pursue this program, and we've been working through a safety analysis of the entire county. I know Mr. Blevins has left, but VDOT was involved with this process from the beginning, and we've worked through public engagement, and now we've got an action plan to help move some projects forward. I'll be brief on some of these topics, but overall, the goal of this program is road safety. This is the federal highways kind of five tools or 5 goals for highway safety. And you can see there's a lot of different things that go into that. It's not just making a safer road. It's not just making people more aware, driving the right speed limit. It is kind of a holistic approach of looking at how we're responding to emergency crashes, recommendations for vehicles. So there's some of those things are outside of the realm of Botetourt County. They are outside of that. But this program is looking at what we can do, what you could do here in the county. So just briefly, kind of the more sobering information as we dove into the data. This is the last 9 years of fatal and serious injury crashes in the county. So a total of 41 fatalities, roughly 5 per year. And so again, that's just trying to bring that to attention. The goal is to reduce those numbers. And you'll see there's a little bit of a dip in 2020, and then kind of it's risen up since. I'll say from looking at crash data throughout the Commonwealth, this is very common. There was a lot less driving in 2020. And since that time, we have seen higher speeds. The Virginia State Police have also noticed this, higher speeds and more safety challenges. And so again, trying to bring awareness to this topic. The number one type of crash that's occurring is a fixed object off-road. For a rural locality, this is very common. Vehicles going off the shoulder, catching a tire on the lip of a road and heading off and hitting a tree or some other type of object that's off-road. We've got a couple other statistics that, trying to have a conversation. Generally, if you're in a car crash, and this is something we've seen across the state as well, folks driving the cars are now much safer than they were 10 and 20 years ago. But where the fatalities and serious injuries are happening more often are with motorcyclists and bicyclists and pedestrians. So you can see there, you're much more likely if the incident includes one of those types to be injured or hurt, but in a vehicle. So we've increased our vehicular safety standards, but that the higher speeds have led to other safety challenges. I think one of the most interesting things from an engineering standpoint, as we've looked through this, what this is showing just basically is we kind of mapped all the roads that are in the county, obviously not private roads. These are VDOT funded or VDOT maintained and state locality maintained roadways. But 7% of the roads within the county, so the 7% of the mileage in the county accounts for almost 55% of the serious and fatal injury crashes. So it's a very targeted number of locations that are causing the majority of the fatal and serious injury crashes. And that's the focus of kind of the next step is we've identified those locations so we can look at improvement options and what we could do at those locations. I'll just share a little bit some of the targeted locations, and certainly I think hopefully you all have seen some of this information. This was shared at some of the public engagement meetings in a number of corridors. These are the top 10 segments of roadway in the county that were in that high injury network, that 7%. It's not all, but it's the top 10 in that group. And we also identified kind of the top 5 intersections for safety. So a number of those on 220 and 460. So we did hold a number of meetings in the county, both last spring in May of 2024 and then fall of 2024. The first round of engagement was really to ask folks in the Botetourt community, what they felt, where they felt unsafe, locations like that, to get a little more data for our analysis. The second round of meeting was to present those top locations and get feedback. And so I think this is kind of some of the voting, and we did get a number of good responses and good comments across the board. And this is kind of the ranking from the public generally on how much. We kind of asked, how much money would you spend at this location? And that's really was trying to get at what's the number 1 location. You can see there, Roanoke at Catawba, and then Cloverdale, Reed Mountain, kind of two locations that were in the top. And just kind of highlighting where those locations are along, again, so just putting those back into perspective where they're located. And as well as we put the corridors. And so you'll see there, number 1, again, very similar locations where number 1, kind of looking at those same areas along 220 and 460 were really the highest for the public. We did in the report, there are a number of recommendations for each of these locations. They are based on the exact crash patterns. I'm not going to go into that today, but certainly happy to answer any questions about specific locations, but didn't want to take more time than necessary. The goal of the resolution is, as John mentioned, this is a federally funded program. One of the elements that's at the end of it is getting the board, the local board, to provide a letter of support or a commitment to working to reduce fatal and serious injury crashes. And so we, through the stakeholder team, and that included the Roanoke team and VDOT and all those folks, we reviewed. So the state has an action plan to reduce fatalities by 50% by 2045. So it is 20 years out. And so Roanoke County has also set that goal. And, we've made, in speaking with John, I think what's in the resolution is to match that, to match the state action plan. Again, there's no commitment of funds. This is to kind of finish off the action plan. But it does allow your action plan, again, just to continue that conversation that there are fatal and serious injury crashes happening, and how can making sure we're bringing a focus to that as we go forward. There is future funding. This is not anything you need to focus on at the moment, but there will be. One of the other bonuses of completing the safety action plan is that you can then submit for federal funding for one of the items in your safety action plan. So that's the other benefit. There is additional federal funding that could be used to pursue one of the intersections or corridors and immediately start working on that action plan. And that can be a very wide variety of things. So you can just, working on doing, that money could cover performing additional study, smaller scale improvements, things that we can work with VDOT on, education, training campaigns. I know other localities are doing, drinking and driving campaigns, or working with high school students on safety campaigns, or larger projects such as something that you might submit to the Smart Scale program, or something, a larger infrastructure project. So that is everything I've got, and certainly happy to take any questions, or hopefully help get your support for the resolution.
Thank you for your presentation. Does anyone have some comments or questions?
I have a couple. just some of the statistics. If you don't, this may not be a big part of your presentation, but early on, you had some pie graphs. I think there were three, and one of them was pedestrian and bicycle. A hugely high percentage of FSI, I guess. Do you know what the number is behind that? I mean, how many, if the actual base number is, I don't know, 100, that's
Sure.
one thing, but if it's two.
Certainly. So from the fatal and serious injury, it is a small number of that over that 9 years. I don't have the exact number, but I can pull that out and we can get that information. I didn't pull down the exact ones, but it is a lower number overall, that's making up that number.
It really does seem to identify a key area for focus, pedestrian and bicycle.
Absolutely. Well, one of the top things that we've learned through this process with Roanoke and Botetourt together is that there are a number of locations that have, higher speed, 460s, the 220s that are higher speeds that the pedestrians end up walking along, or bicyclists are using those routes and being impacted in certain ways. So trying to look at those as target areas.
I guess the other question is, are you laying this before us for action? And are we expected to be ready to proceed, or?
So the only ask today is just the resolution of committing to the 50%, working towards a 50% reduction. There's no, in the federal program, there's no clawbacks. If 1 year you don't do anything, but the next year, the goal is again to bring awareness, to state this so that, as we've come up with a list of projects. So, hopefully working with VDOT or potentially your local funds or, smart scale funds or any of the other transportation programs, you would focus on these projects in these areas as you go forward over the next 10 to 12 years. It's not intended to ask for any funds at this moment.
Right. Thank you.
Other questions? Comments? So I was wondering, as you were going through the data, it seemed that you calculated some numbers, some absolute numbers of accidents, and then you asked the public where they thought the problem areas were. Did those two match?
Very much so along our corridors. There were some intersections that the public kind of thought were a little more dangerous than what the data was showing. And so I think that's interesting. We've obviously presented a lot of information to county staff to have, but certainly the corridor sections were highlighted by many. And then when we presented that information, there were, I would say most of the public came and said, yes, I feel unsafe there, or I see why this is number one.
So the work's really to guide us on where we might make improvements going forward.
The hope would be is that, if you did a project in at one of these top intersections or corridors, you would more quickly reduce your fatal and serious injury.
So I'm going to read the resolution. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
What I do have a question as far as when you can take, especially on 220 Reed Mountain area there, you have a flashing yellow that you can go ahead and take a left. Was this study done before that period of time, or done in consideration with it? And have you noticed a higher amount of traffic accidents with that?
Sure. And I'd love for Mr. Blevins to have still been here as well with VDOT, because he was part of these discussions. But certainly one of the things that we've noticed in this study and looking at this across the state. So the flashing yellow arrows were kind of blanketly implemented over the last 5 years. And we have noticed that there are locations where they have increased crash incidents. And so, yes, not every location, but certainly that location and some of the others, the crashes have increased because of those flashing yellow arrows. So it's something we've recommended to not just say that's a solution and say, okay, we need the right sight distance. You need to review that, go back and take a look at that rather than a blanket recommendation.
Excellent. So I'll read the resolution that we are being asked to consider. Whereas the Botetourt County Board of Supervisors is committed to advocating for safe transportation facilities both in the county and in the region. And whereas Botetourt County, in conjunction and coordination with Roanoke County and the town of Benton, applied for and received federal funding through the Safe Streets for All program. And whereas Botetourt County, Roanoke County, and town of Benton contracted with Timmons Group to analyze crash data and conduct public engagement to produce a comprehensive safety action plan. And whereas the comprehensive safety action plan utilizes a traffic crash analysis using nationally recognized methodologies to generate a high injury network ranking every roadway in Botetourt by number of serious and fatal crashes. And whereas the comprehensive safety action plan proposes countermeasures and strategies to address these areas of concern. And whereas the Board of Supervisors commits to reducing roadway fatalities and serious injuries by 50% by 2045 in line with the Commonwealth's own safety commitments. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Botetourt County Board of Supervisors endorses and supports the Botetourt County Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. That is the resolution we've been asked to consider.
Madam Chair, I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mrs. Pendleton, we'll ask you to come down, please, for agenda item number 11, consideration of amendments to the Development Services Third-Party Inspection Policy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to you and to members of the board. We're upon a new statewide building code cycle. It presented us with an opportunity to evaluate some of our existing policy, and in consult with the development community as well as other building officials in the region and across the state, we really discovered our existing policies a bit limiting, and it's not quite consistent with the 2021 Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code. So these are just minor tweaks that really align with the updated code cycle that's required of us to implement, and just again allows us to better align just terminology and names about design professionals and who is qualified to perform third-party inspections. And so that's really it in summary. I can answer any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think the matter before us is to approve the Botetourt County third-party inspection policy. I will, shall I read that? That's rather long.
No, we had a chance to look at that.
Yeah, let's take a minute to look at that. I think everybody has seen it. Are there any questions for Ms. Pendleton? Any questions?
If no questions, I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion for approval and a second. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Pendleton. That motion passes. Mr. Hinkle? If you would come down, please, for agenda item number 12. We'll get update on the emergency communications projects.
Afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Matt Hinkle, your Emergency Communication Systems Manager. I have two items before you today. The first one, subsection A, will require board action. The second one is just for informational purposes only. And as a series of the lease agreements that we have with all the tower sites, because of the new communication system, we've moved on to Purgatory Tower, which is located in Buchanan. That particular, it is going to be a lease amendment. The original lease was signed in April of 1991. This is going to be the first amendment to that lease. It was originally signed with Contel Communications, I believe. The subsequent owner now is Crown Castle, and we've negotiated a lease for our new equipment on that tower, which will have some additional equipment that is not there today. And that will be at a rate of $1,995 per month for the equipment on that tower. It has been reviewed by our legal and is sufficient. And I'm here to answer any questions that you may have regarding that lease.
Thank you, Mr. Hinkle. And that is found on page 122 of the packet. In case you haven't looked at that, that First Amendment is spelled out there. Any questions?
Madam Chair, if there's no questions from the board, I move for the approval of First Amendment to the tower leasing agreement in the Crown Castle.
Second.
We have a motion for approval and a second. Do we have any comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Hinkle. That First Amendment has been supported.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on, I wanted to do an update on some of the progress that we've made with the communication system. We've had a few setbacks, as it were, with some of the tower sites that were identified. I don't know where all the signs are. Oh, are they hidden? Yeah, there we are. So as you can see on the screen, this was the original contract design that we had with Motorola. This would included when we were going to be part of the Roanoke Valley radio system. Due to issues with one of the towers in the Blue Ridge area, we had to go to Plan B, which was a part of Change Order 1. This is the design that we were looking at. Unfortunately, if you looked at the very top at Iron Gate, that was another Crown Castle tower site that we had identified. We had some issues with tower space. They were supposed to have a vendor that was going to be vacating some space on the tower. However, that did not happen. So we had to find another location. And we found one just to the east of the Iron Gate off McKinney Hollow Road, just over the county line in Allegheny County. And this is the current design that we're looking at now, and it's has resulted in what we'll talk about here in a minute, Change Order 2. This achieves all the same coverage goals that we were looking for initially, and it's also rather simplistic. It does give a loop, but we're not having a lot of superfluous links or anything of that nature. So we were pretty happy with that with this design. Change Order 2, which we've already executed, but we just wanted to bring it to the board for transparency. With the new 911 dispatch center that's going in down at the Reed Mountain Fire Station, we're going to have to build a tower that was going to go on the actual location of the parcel. However, we ran into some issues with space. And it was better if we moved it across the street, and we've negotiated a easement with Dynex on some property that they have. They've been very gracious with us, and we're going to be locating a tower there. We're actually working with a third-party company to construct that tower, which will save the county somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 construction costs. However, there are a number of things that we're going to have to buy: a shelter, generator, and things of that nature. And that's what that first number, that $485,000 is additional cost that was not in the original contract. Also in the change order two, we were able to negotiate a repeater and console upgrade. These are just items within the contract that are newer. And when we first signed the contract, they were so new, we were a little nervous that they were bleeding edge. However, with the pushing out of the timeline, we feel that we will be able to do that, and we would get the longer longevity of that new equipment in its life cycle. So we'll be getting new repeaters and new console. With that third bullet point, that N+1 redundancy, the new repeaters allow us to have, in effect, an extra repeater at each site, an extra piece of equipment that allows for more redundancy. If one of the repeaters goes down, this one will pick up. So it gives us that much more redundancy, and that was a cost of $70,000. And then there was an engineering cost. This was just basically because we had to redesign the microwave system, had to bring out the engineers to do that, and that was $40,000. So the total change order cost for change order two is $595,000. Hopefully this will be the last major change order from an infrastructure standpoint. I think we've got the design pretty well nailed down now. The towers that we have located have space where we don't feel that we're going to have to make any more changes. There may be another change order down the road. I feel that we'll probably have to do a small one for a true up for the actual radios for the sheriff and for fire. Excuse me, as they've added personnel, we may need to add a few, but that will be a much smaller type of change order. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Any questions on the change order and the new system design?
Questions? Mr. Clinton?
Your first bullet on the last slide. So I guess two words that are alarming when they're brought together: additional equipment and $500 or $485,000. Is that net additional? I mean, is it replacement equipment or substitute, or is it some we didn't know we had to do?
It is additional. It is some things that we did not know because we've moved the tower across the street. We're going to have to put in additional switches. We also had to add an additional microwave link because the plan is to run fiber across underneath the street from that tower that goes into the dispatch center. We also added a microwave link that will allow for redundancy in case the fiber gets cut. The dispatch center won't go down. So then there's also a shelter at the tower that wasn't accounted for originally because we were going to house all that equipment inside the dispatch center. And of course, a generator and everything that goes along with that.
But we had some of that on the other side, right before the relocation.
Not a generator or a shelter. The microwave is net new. Some of the switches, because we've separated the two locations. You're going to have all the electronics equipment. It's going to be in the shelter across the street, and it's going to go via fiber into so now you've added switches, things of that nature. Actually, it's going to run through the radio shop and into dispatch. So there was some additional equipment, but that's pretty minor compared to a shelter, which is can be over $100,000, a generator, which is probably another 50 or 60, the electrical work and everything that goes along with that. The bulk of that is from the tower site. It's not the equipment inside the dispatch center.
Bulk of it is what?
At the tower site.
Oh.
I think you mentioned some savings on construction costs.
Yes, ma'am. So kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But we're working with a party. Not only are we going to be saving money there at the dispatch center, probably $400,000 or $500,000 in the construction of the actual tower itself. We're also going to be working with them up on Tinker Mountain. We've got we had some issues with the tower that we were going to locate on. They had some exorbitant prices that the vendor was going to charge us. So we're going to actually construct a tower and go on it, but we're not going to build it. This third party is going to build it, and it'll save us an additional probably another $400,000 or $500,000. So all in all, from a construction standpoint, we're probably going to save anywhere from $800,000 to $1 million.
So that could then offset the cost of the change orders?
I don't know if it'll offset it, but it will, it obviously is not going to add to it.
Right.
You're right.
So-
Yeah, that
so
change order.
That's just the change order number, that one you gave us, but then might be savings elsewhere in the project.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
How does this impact timing?
We're going to be ordering the equipment in early February. So we're still on a schedule to have all the equipment installed probably in early 2026. And then with the completion of the 911 center, we're looking at a summer. So we really haven't backed up the timing from too much. We're still looking at a late summer 2026 potential cutover.
And while we have you here, how will this transition impact our day-to-day work? So when this system starts to come online, is there going to be a smooth transition for all our users, our end user groups, and will there be any loss of service?
No, there will not be any loss of service. This is kind of like trying to change an engine in an airplane while it's flying. You just can't go down. But we'll have a transition plan together where we'll have both systems up for about 6 months. And then we'll cut everybody over to the new system, and the old system will stay there just in case something happens, and then we'll decommission the old system. So there will be a period of time where both systems will be up and live.
Excellent. Other questions? Comments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a wonderful day.
Another update, we will ask Mr. Evans and Chief Ferguson to come down and talk to us about item 13, the courthouse.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. No, sir, I'll wait for you. I'm here to request consideration for additional lease space for the courthouse files in the same building, in the Clark building, which is exactly across Back Street from the courthouse. The initial space that we leased could not contain the weight of all the files or the space. So I'm requesting additional space. The lease that I'm requesting is for 14 months. And the reason it's an odd amount of months, so it'll end up ending at the same time as the first lease that I have. So if I have to renew, I can just renew at the same time, and probably under one lease instead of two. The additional lease is for $935 a month for a total of $13,090. And that'll end in April of 2036. So we're probably looking at another year after that of the combined of the two spaces. Mr. Clark has been gracious enough to allow us to go ahead and put our shelves and files in there. So now we know that this will be the last space that we're requested to store the files in.
And that lease is on page 140 of our packets. I do notice on the first page, it says on item 2 there, term of lease. It's written out 18 months, but it's in numbers 14 months.
Yes, that'll get corrected before we actually have the lease signed put in. But it's for 14.
It's 14.
Yes, ma'am.
So I think the item before us is to approve or not this proposed lease that we have in front of us. Any questions for Mr. Evans? Do I have a motion?
I'll move for approval if there's no further discussion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the lease for 14 months. So we're going with the correction that will occur there. Any discussion at all? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good
Chief
afternoon,
Ferguson.
Madam Chair and members of the board. I too am asking for some space. Our lease that we're proposing today is for the last remaining 2 suites in the upstairs of the Clark building, primarily because the building that we occupy for our EMS Central Supply, the Dodd building on the corner of Back Street and 220, will fall in about 2.5 weeks. So it's a game of Tetris, and the same is true. Mr. Clark graciously allowed us to move in advance in hopes that this lease were to take place. But if we had to move again, we'd certainly do so. The reason for both of the suites is there's also an anticipated need of the old finance building on Main Street that we occupy, that's 6 East Main Street. Currently, that is the only space that we have a table to have a conference room of any sorts, as well as storage for our uniforms and wearing apparel and other items that we have to maintain in storage. So we're trying to move all of that into one space so that we free up that building as well. So it's 2 buildings and one is the scenario. We had asked for 18 months. Given that that is the term of the lease before you, that is speculative because we do not have a final destination for any of this. So certainly we would have to revisit that in 18 months if we did not have a home identified or under construction. And Mr. Clark was also gracious enough to negotiate the price to equal the monthly rate of something that Rich already had negotiated, because the ask was slightly higher and he did come down for that. So happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Thank you. This lease is on page 148 of the packet. It's the second lease before us today. So let's take a minute to look at that and ask Chief Ferguson any questions that you might have.
Madam Chair, if there are no further questions, I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you,
very
Chief
much.
Ferguson. We'll ask Ms. Davis to come back down and address item 14 on the agenda, which is a budget update. A little prelude to this, as we went through the budgeting process last year, we all agreed that more structure is good sometimes. So we asked for a kind of process that we were introduced to last month by Ms. Davis, and you're going to continue with this update, and I thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yes. And good afternoon again. As mentioned, this is something new. This will be the second round of presentations for this year. So last month, when I came and spoke before you, we were right at the beginning. See our beautiful little roadmap there. Nothing had really been done other than budget requests had been submitted, and we collected that information. So today, I now have the budget task force recommendation to bring forward to you to summarize in this presentation. In next month's board meeting, we will have the county administrator's recommendations. And then in March, obviously, the budget subcommittee meetings with those recommendations and an advertised budget, and then hoping for a final adoption, as you see there, on April 22nd. As shown last time, we did have some budget guidance for this year to allow departments to sort of structure their requests in alignment with these items. Most notably is the 3% increase for non-operating personnel, for operating non-personnel requests. Additionally, alignment with existing board priorities and projects. Honestly, obviously anything that was ongoing needed to continue. The third item, big prioritization for Parks and Recreation, expanding those services. And finally, a focus on employee recruitment and retention. So here we have the stages of review. Again, I did show you this last time. We are now at the point where the first stage of review, the budget task force review, is completed. I should say the first internal review is completed. This one is probably the most detailed of all, and it's comprised of a group that represents all functional areas of the county to review it, in detail and present a recommendation to the county administrator, which is the stage that we're in now. Next up will be the budget subcommittee. So here we have sort of a snapshot of our progress on the operating expenditure side. You can see off to the left the legend of all the different categories. So last month we started off with a requested amount of $94.7 million. That's now been whittled down to $93.7 million based on the budget task force recommendations. You can see there's not been a lot of change as far as which category takes up the most. Public safety was a little bit higher last time, and now education has sort of inked them out a little bit, but those two categories obviously take up the biggest chunk of the budget. And just as a note, the figure included for schools is once again just a placeholder at this point. It's been kept level with the FY25 contribution. That will obviously be looked at later on and potentially changed, but at this point in time, it has just been kept level as a placeholder. Okay, moving on to the, capital, no. Oh, we seem to be missing a slide. Okay. Well, I'll just talk about it. Moving on to the capital side of things, how that is currently allocated, the biggest chunk of our capital improvement plan is public safety at 36%. A lot of that is equipment replacement, the continuation of the jail camera replacement and software. And then the second biggest category is Parks and Recreation. Obviously, a lot of emphasis put on that category. There is an increase recommended for the Rec Incentive Fund, which I know is a popular item. After that, we have Public Works making up 19%, primarily maintenance projects, followed by General Government at 17%, which is a lot of technology replacement items and some continuation of existing software replacements that were going on, followed by Community Development at 6%, which really is just the YMCA contribution. So the initial request for this started at 6.4 million. The budget task force got this down to 5.1 million. And I do want to note that items that are being considered for financing or alternate funding are not included in this because they have separate considerations. Okay. All right, so here we have a little snapshot to show you the progression of the budget. The green line is FY25, the blue line is FY26, which is why we only have two items there. So you can see where we started with requested at 100.3 million. That's now come down to 98 million. And we'll continue to be refined as we move through the process. Okay. So that's the expenditure side. Now looking at the revenues to get an update on that. You can see here we started off the FY25 adopted budget figure was 92.3 million. That went up to 94.6 million as far as the revenue estimates last month. That has now gone up to 96.3 million. I do want to be very clear that this does not always move upward as we progress through the process. It still could go down, but it's just based on the most current information we have at the time. Obviously, as more time goes by, we have more comfort in that the figures are accurate. So I would suspect this will continue to change as we move through the process. And so you'll see there the overall revenue projections increased by 1.7 million, which was really in local revenues. We still don't have much change in the federal and state side, which will change as we continue to move through things. Okay. Now, the real fun one. So the green bar are our revenues and the orange line are our expenditures, and that space in between is what we lovingly refer to as the budget gap. So you can see last month where we were, it was pretty significant at 5.7. Thankfully, through the budget task force work and their recommendations, we now have that down to, I want to say 1.8 million, yes. So obviously, we are going to continue to work on this and refine both of these numbers as we move to the process until we have a balanced budget to present later on. Are there any questions I can answer at this time?
Questions for Ms. Davis?
I was having a little bit of difficulty with all the colors on the pie charts.
Okay.
Since I'm somewhat colorblind. But,
sure.
So I was just looking, and I may have missed this, but looking for evidence that we're budgeting proportionally more for Parks and Recreation. It looked to me like it's just the opposite, but I may have missed it.
Well, so again, you're right. It is hard to see. There's a lot of green. So that Parks and Recreation in particular on the operating side went from 2.9% to 3.1% of the total. So proportionally, it does make up a larger portion of the pie with the current recommended budget. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And it does make up a more significant chunk of the capital improvement plan as it stands now than it did last year. So.
Okay.
Other questions? Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Item 15, we have the opioid utilization contract award. Commonwealth Attorney's Office.
Gives us a hint.
Do we have them, Gary?
He must be, oh, excuse me. Just 1 second. Mr. Alexander is not here, not present. I think he had some other pressing issues that he could not come. So what ends up happening in associated with the opioid settlement, of course, you all know that there has been a settlement with multiple pharmacies, retail pharmacies, and with drug manufacturers and others throughout the nation. And we joined in with some of those lawsuits that were associated, and we have gotten some of the settlement money. We continually to get some of that along the way. And at the last time that I looked, I think that we had about $240,000 or $250,000 in the account where no money has been spent out of that to date. So the issue associated with this, and Mr. Alexander has been helping, is that it's very limited amount about how you can end up spending these dollars. So it was suggested by the opioid group that we end up having a strategic plan that would end up helping us to outline how to spend those dollars best within Botetourt County and how we end up serving those with afflictions and how that ends up taking place. So that is what we are looking at here in front of you. It was the we ended up putting out an RFP, request for proposals, and then we ended up getting those back into the and looked at those. So the recommendation
as you can end up seeing, was to award the contract to Omni Institute to create a strategic plan for the utilization of opioid settlement funds in accordance with the attached resolution. Omni, their bid was $49,980.50 and 183-day completion, whereas NTM Health, their bid was $55,000 with 730-day completion. So the attached resolution would end up giving us the authority to move forward and enter into the contract with Omnia and move forward on with this work and get the strategic plan started. So I would end up asking that we end up awarding the contract to Omnia Health Institute and start moving forward on this process. It would also, just as a reminder to the board, that we ended up applying to the opioid organizations throughout the state for additional funds. If we did a strategic plan, they would end up helping to pay for that. So they ended up giving us additional dollars, so that in essence, there are zero Botetourt general dollars associated with this. And there would not be anything anticipated into the future. We just need the authorization to move forward with the contract.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. LaRue? Okay. The matter before us is to proceed with awarding the contract to Omni Institute to develop a strategic plan for the use of the opioid money.
Seems like a sound thing to do. I'll move for approval.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Lockaby, item 16, please. Consideration of settlement agreement.
Yes, Madam Chair. Want to go through the background on this very quickly. We had the Commissioner of the Revenue had a disagreement with a taxpayer regarding the proper classification of some of their personal property, whether it was properly classified as business personal property or machinery and tools. Following several years of administrative appeals and litigation, we resolved what was a fairly significant disagreement both with the taxpayer and with the State Department of Taxation. We are going to pay $18,980.05 to the taxpayer. That was a potential liability of nearly $100,000. This is also going to result in in our agreeing to certain tax treatment of certain pieces of personal property going forward until and unless there's a substantive change in this business's operations. We have also been informed that part of our disagreements with the state tax commissioner have actually resulted in changes in his administrative procedures, which is gratifying considering that we were annoyed with some of the procedures that he was following. We consider this to be a qualifiedly good result from the litigation, and I would ask that the Board of Supervisors authorize finalization of the settlement agreement and dismissal of the lawsuit.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Lockaby?
If no questions, Madam Chair, I move for approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the settlement agreement as described. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
For your
Chair.
work. Next, we will have Ms. Pendleton come down with the Apex monthly report or update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. As I spoke with you last month, I'll let you know that there had been a lot of movement and a lot of information coming into the office and coordination, as is pretty typical as we get different renditions of civil plans and things coming into the office. Flurry of activity, and the offsite and onsite plans were, as I had mentioned before, already approved by VDOT, and they were able to be approved by the county. And additionally, the land disturbance permitting was all submitted, issued, and approved, and we held a pre-construction meeting to authorize commencement of clearing and grading construction. Spoke with the company today to get an update for you all, and they continue to mobilize, do some surveying, staking, anticipating that the official commencement of construction will start on Monday of next week. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about that. We have some building permits we know that are going to be coming in any minute for the turbines themselves, as well as the ancillary facilities. So just continuing to work through that.
Thank you. Any questions? I do have some questions that are based on things I've read and some questions that have come to me through my constituency and other members of the county. But I think on January 20th, there was a presidential memo released regarding both offshore and on-site windmill activities. And it regarded, I think the title was the cessation of windmill production. Can we have some comment on how that impacts our project, this Rocky Forge project?
I couldn't speak to that at all. I can defer to see if
Mr. Lockerbie
would be interested in
address that and how that memo relates to Rocky Forge.
Well, Madam Chair, it really is dependent upon whether there are any outstanding federal permits that they need to get. I have to say that federal permits are, of course, not something that we necessarily pay. We pay a lot of attention to whether they exist, but we don't pay a lot of attention to trying to do highly educated federal government staff's jobs for them. To the best of our knowledge, there were no further permits that Apex needed from the federal government that would be held up by this executive order. Although, of course, to a degree, managing their federal permits is ultimately up to them to do.
Are there any particular agencies that you feel would be impacted by this or should review the permitting, or were there, is there any impact on our particular project?
Again, not to my knowledge, and neither to Nicole's. Probably know I have an oral argument at the Court of Appeals next Tuesday regarding our previous round of Rocky Forge litigation. I spoke with counsel for Rocky Forge earlier this week, and he indicated that, to his knowledge, there weren't going to be any impediments. I will note the executive order is very broadly and vaguely drafted, and that presents a lot of problems in terms of trying to analyze what it really is going to mean in practice. Here, almost exactly a week later, still trying to figure out what it really means.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think I'm confident in thinking that you will continue to examine that, and if it appears that this is going to have a direct impact on this project, we would be informed as that information becomes available.
I'm going to be partially deferential to Mrs. Pendleton here, but I talk with their attorneys every few weeks, and if I hear anything, I will certainly keep the board informed.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Thank you both. So we come to item 18, appointments. We have 5 of those, so we'll go through those one by one. The first is to consider reappointment of Tim Snyder to the Planning Commission. If reappointed to the new term, it will end January 1st, 2029. That's hard to say. Mr. Snyder is willing to serve.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. The next is to consider the appointment of Howard Shoemate as a Blue Ridge Behavioral Health Care alternate for the Community Policy and Management Team, CPMT. If appointed, Mr. Shoemate's term will end on January 31st, 2027. Mr. Shoemate is willing to serve.
Move for approval.
We have a motion for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Third, we would consider the appointment of Raquel Rogers, Director of Social Services, to the Community Policy and Management Team, CPMT. If appointed, Ms. Rogers' term will end on January 31st, 2027. Ms. Rogers is willing to serve. Do we have a motion?
I move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Consider the appointment of Michael Hudson and Margaret Peggy Preston Fanny to the Historic Greenfield Advisory Council.
Madam Chair, I'll make a couple of comments on that. Michael Hudson, well, they're both hugely qualified. Michael Hudson is the Executive Director of Historic Smithfield, which of course is a companion property plantation of Colonel William Preston. So he's the Executive Director there. He has a career's worth of historical experience on historical committees and so on. His companion here, Peggy Preston Fanny, as the name implies, she is a direct descendant of William Preston, and she too has been engaged and interested in historical organizations throughout her career. So they're both highly qualified people, and I'll move for approval of both of them.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. And the last one is to consider the appointment of Donna Cox to the Botetourt County Citizen Commission for the Preservation of Historic Properties, the BCCC.
I'll say a few quick words about Donna. She recently retired teacher at James River, history teacher. Great deal of activity through her career in historical issues as well. So she's highly qualified and energetic, good nominee. So I'll move for approval of her.
I would love to second that. I agree with you. Her energy and expertise will be very, very valuable. So I'll second that. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? That motion carries. So that brings us to item 19, the citizen comment period for general comments. I have received 3 requests to speak. If you would like to speak and you have not turned in a form, I will call on you at the end. Our first citizen comment will come from Danny Goad.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Danny Goad. I reside in the Valley District. I stand before you today to talk about an issue that I would rather not talk about. 2 months ago, I spoke before the board with regard to the materials in the library that are provided to children. They're inappropriate and corrupting of our children. At that meeting, speakers of the public were accused of violence. I ask the question, how many children in Botetourt County have committed suicide, and what are those trends? This corruption that we're placing on our children, that will be a consequence. A year and a half ago, you passed a resolution. Three of you passed a resolution. Reminded me of the time when Jesus was about to be crucified. What did the Jews who had accused him, what did they say? Release the other guy, but crucify Jesus, and may the blood of him be on our children. This is a direct action that will place and harm and consume the blood of the children of Botetourt County. I don't like talking about this, but I'm not doing my duty before God if I allow these books to remain in the library, and now they've been read in the Blue Ridge Library. How many children will you corrupt? I have an obligation to my neighbor, a duty to look out for my neighbor. I don't like to be here. You are forcing us to buy books that are corrupting the children, and it hurts them. All 5 of you, you know you're doing it. If I don't pay my taxes, you're going to come at the point of a gun and you're going to take my house and throw me out. I know that. But there may be a time that that becomes appropriate. This is wrong. It violates everything that you stand before God as a civil magistrate. You stand before God. And one day we all will be held accountable for our actions and our decisions, and especially those we hurt. I ask you, please, get rid of these books, because it looks like, from my view, that you endorse everything that's going on with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Charles Rule.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, Board. Charles Rule, Fincastle. Excuse me. As Mr. Goad alluded, on January 16th, a young woman had her nieces, they were ages 3 and 4, at the Blue Ridge Library for story time. For the sake of her nieces, the young woman was shocked to hear that the book being read with no warning or disclaimer was about 2 gay men with children. You said in 2023 that you supported everything our libraries are doing because you want to uphold parental rights. But what about the parental rights of those 2 little girls? This goes to the heart of our concerns about our libraries. There are books that some parents would find objectionable, even dangerous, waiting to be discovered by unsuspecting children. And in this case, 2 small children were introduced to an idea for which they were unprepared. Parents have a right to choose when and how they educate their children about sensitive issues. Some would say gay marriage is legal and gay adoption is legal, so get over it. But not so fast. Many in the county do not approve and resent schools and libraries indoctrinating children behind their backs. A medical study was released in the UK on January the 24th that showed that cases of gender dysphoria for 0 to 18-year-olds increased 3,043% from 2011 to 2021. This confusion about gender and sexuality has become an epidemic, and you're looking the other way. One of you expressed anger that it could be insinuated that the Board of Supervisors doesn't want to protect children. Then do something, please. Thank you.
Thank you. The last form that I have, Stacy Reese. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the board. First, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Stacy Reese. I'm the Communication Director for this part of Southwest Virginia of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We call this area the Roanoke, Virginia Stake. I've also brought with me President Dan Dutton. He is the first counselor in the stake presidency, and Brother Dane McBride. He is a former physician in Roanoke City. We want to thank each one of you for all the work and service you provide to Botetourt County. You guys put in a lot of time, work, effort, care, and you do it graciously and willingly. And we thank you. We have many of our congregations, members of our congregation that live in Botetourt County, and they get to benefit from the work you've done. But we too would like to do our part. While our church is a global church, we have several congregations in the Roanoke Valley, and even in the counties beyond. And one of the core values of our church is to serve others. We believe in Jesus Christ, and he served everyone he came in contact with. And while we are not perfect, we do want to try to do that as well. We instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and becoming a food pantry or a financial assistance organization, we like to do this by partnering with other organizations and agencies. The packet that I have given that you should have received, one side gives you a little bit of information about us, and the other side gives some free community resources. And all of those community resources are free except for a few, but even those are at reduced cost. So there's a lot that can be offered that the community can use and look at, use, or use bits and pieces of. But a few of the organizations that we have partnered with recently, in 2023, we worked with Feeding Southwest Virginia and made sure that they received a meat protein food truck each month of that year. And that could be approximately 30,000 pounds of meat. And of course, that ends up being distributed to other local agencies or food pantries, and then on to the citizens in the valley. We've partnered with the Bedford County Domestic Violence Services organization. They needed some work on their building, and we went out and we did what they asked us to do. And in addition, we also cleaned up the front of the building, all the way down the driveway, fixed the mailbox, et cetera, et cetera. So our ask to you today is if you know of any way that we can assist you all in helping the citizens of Botetourt County, or if you know of any organizations or agencies that we should partner with.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the offer. Please come each month. You're always welcome. Thank you. Do anyone else like to offer public comment? Okay. Hearing none, I will ask any supervisors if you would like to offer any closing remarks. No one?
Ma'am, I do. I have a remark I'd like. Oh, were you? Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead on that. The only thing I was going to just talk about is some of the stuff that we have for East Park about Harkness screens. I don't know if you all remember that, and so sorry that Harkness Screen has closed the doors. And that was a small manufacturing company, and unfortunately, they were the victim of COVID, as many other small businesses were. As you know, the business is closed. The economic development is working to refill that building. And that building is near a cul-de-sac at the end of East Park. And there's a very small adjoining property there that is currently in ownership of the BOS. and it was kind of missed in the transfer to the EDA. So since the closure of Harkness is, I think it's correct time to clean this up and get the item up with this transfer. This is about 0.553 acres. So with the permission of the BOS, so I'd like to ask the staff to make arrangements to clean this plan for the transfer to the EDA for their efforts to do so. So I don't know if we need to have a consensus of that, but if everybody's in approval, certainly like to have the staff clean that little piece of property up.
May end up being better just procedurally if you did take a vote.
Okay.
Madam.
Okay. Would you like to put that in the form
Yeah,
of a
I'd
motion?
like that in a motion if I could.
So we have a motion to authorize staff to look at cleaning up the access to these 0.553,
Acres.
about
About
5.553 acres in the area of the Harkness screens, the former
Yes.
Harkness screen. So that's the motion.
I'll second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. And my comments, just two things. First of all, thank you to my colleagues for electing me. I will do my very best to represent us well, to facilitate efficient discussions and meetings, and to listen as I have done to the public. So I'm really honored to be in this role, and I thank you for your confidence in me. And the last thing I'll say is going to be a shout out to our school system. This is probably a surprise, and I'm glad you're still here. But earlier today, for my day job, I was at the Berglund Center for Career Quest, which is a regional, and I mean regional, Allegheny, Montgomery County, and everything in between, career fair, basically. And I'm so happy to say that Botetourt was well represented with volunteers, with companies, which is fantastic. That's the idea, is to expose our the regional students to different career opportunities. But the highlight of my day was when Mike Ketron led 200 Botetourt County 10th graders into the facilities, and they proceeded to go through and start talking to all the companies that were there. But then it got even better because the staff from the workforce board who put this event on came and said, Amy, I just got to tell you, the Botetourt County students were the most polite and the nicest that have come through here all day. So well done, Botetourt County 10th graders. And 200 of them, I hope, had a very enriching experience today. So well done. I will leave it to you, Mr. Clinton.
Thank you, ma'am. I have just kind of a career opportunity, or not a career opportunity, a career announcement to make, political career. I'm up for re-election this year. And for, let's see, 22 of the past 26 years, I've had the distinct honor of representing the Amsterdam District on the Board of Supervisors, and it's been the ride of a lifetime. It's been great. I've enjoyed every minute of it. It's time to step down, so I'm just announcing I'm not running for re-election, and next December 31st will be the completion of my public service on the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I think we all can say a huge amount of thank you for your service.
Yes, ma'am. You bet.
Absolutely. And we got one more year. So
That's right.
great.
Thank you again, Steve, for everything you've done. I've had the wonderful pleasure serving with you for some of those years, and the knowledge you have, the ability to take a look at things ahead of when they even happen. So it just has been an honor and pleasure to serve with you and just learn from you.
You're very kind. Thank you, Maggie. It's been a pleasure for me as well, and a learning experience all the way through. Thank you very much.
I know they've been told not to applaud at certain occasions, but I believe this is an occasion that deserves it.
Well said. Well
Well, I
said.
got to work for you for a lot of those years, and been a pleasure serving with you, and I've learned a lot already. So appreciate you.
Thank you. Likewise.
But we're not letting you off the hook because we got a lot of work to do this year.
We did
Right.
11
We're
months.
not done yet. Fantastic. With that, we might take a turn, but we're going to welcome Mr. Lockaby back for our annual FOIA training.
Is that
Some edge of the seats.
is that a punishment?
I don't know. Steve just had this great moment and now we get FOIA training.
Could we take?
Members of the public, you're welcome to stay. You are welcome to leave. I will tell you what I would do if I were in your seats. Thank you all for being here. Yeah. Put on his glasses.
You ready for this?
Oh my gosh.
You're ready for it.
Does anybody need a break before we
That'd be
we
good.
take a break? All right, we're gonna adjourn for 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
Everybody's gonna need a cup of coffee. For
Okay.
this, so.
Coffee
All right.
and bio break.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Here to talk to you about the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And I know it says here on my title also the GDC-DPA, which is the Government Data Collection and Dissemination Practices Act. I'm actually just barely going to touch on that because it really doesn't ever impinge on Board of Supervisors' lives. To some degree, I'm also going to touch on issues of the First Amendment and the Americans with Disabilities Act, because those do somewhat impact on your lives with respect to Board of Supervisors meetings. By way of background, you guys need to have FOIA training upon being elected within 2 months after taking office, and then every other year thereafter. I make it a practice to do it every single year. Doesn't hurt you too much to have to do this every single year. That way, if one of you retires or whatever, and we have an interim member, I don't have to fit it in at a weird time or anything else. Just do it every January and try to keep it fresh in your mind. The Freedom of Information Act, of course, is the primary Virginia statute dealing with public records and open meetings. Trying to figure out how to actually use this thing.
Or you should be able to use these.
Oh, thank you. So we'll start off with public records. I'm going to give this relatively shorter shrift than I do with your public records people. Ms. Parker, Ms. Bradbury, we spend a good long time talking about public records. Slightly less important to you as supervisors, but still worth really understanding what it's about. A public record is, generally speaking, anything written or recorded in any tangible or electronic medium that relates to the transaction of public business. Transaction of public business was, for the longest time, simply not defined in Virginia law. Last year, the General Assembly gave a partial definition, particularly with respects to meetings. But with respect to documents, it still remains a common sense standard. An email exchange dealing with church or football, not transaction of public business. Emailing about local tax rates is. I mean, it's very much you can tell it when you see it issue. Note that just because something is in an electronic medium does not mean it's not a record. People have gotten used to this. When I first started doing FOIA trainings with people 15 years ago, oftentimes people thought, oh, well, an email's not a record. That can't be. You guys everybody's with that nowadays. But it's important to remember that if it's written down somewhere, it's potentially subject to inspection under FOIA. I will get to why oftentimes people don't want to go to the trouble of having you hunt down all of that stuff, but it is at least potentially subject to public review. The next thing you got to know, once you know what a public record is how to tell when somebody's asking you for one. It's important to understand just how broad and vague, just how broad the definition of a FOIA request is. Anytime anyone asks a government official for a public record, it's at least potentially a FOIA request. So I would say a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. Is this person really serious? Sometimes people say things that they, not to say that they don't mean it, but they say things in the heat of the moment, and 10 minutes later, they might not really mean it. So there's a little bit of human factor that's involved there. The other thing here is that in order for something to be a FOIA request, it needs to be made with reasonable specificity, which is to say that you need to be able to tell what it is that they're asking for. There's a large gray area there where, and I will get to that more, where the FOIA officer will try to clarify with somebody what it is that they want, if you kind of know what they want, but not 100%. But they do need to tell you in some kind of relatively specific way what they want. In general, my recommendation is to try to get them to write it down, or to write it down and read it back to them. I can go through an example I'll give you the example that I had. And at this point, this is more than 10 years ago. But what happened was that we had the FOIA officer. FOIA officer took a FOIA request by telephone. She wrote it down. It was for a whole bunch of records from some department. So that department goes, they collect up all of these records, and they send them to the person with a bill for $210. As it turned out, the person only wanted about 25 of those pages, and it would have been a lot easier to have just given them what they wanted and charged them at most $5 or $10. Life would have been a lot better if they had not just said it over the phone and refused to write it. If a person's willing to write you an email telling you exactly what they want, take them up on it. The second thing is that you can require the person to give you their name and address or contact information. The reason why you can ask for that, obviously you have the practical one of how are you going to provide documents or information to somebody who won't tell you how to provide it to them. The legal side to that is that FOIA is a right of Virginia citizens. It is not a right of anybody out there in the universe. So if you are not a citizen of Virginia or a representative of a media organization with significant circulation in Virginia, you do not have a right to ask a FOIA request of a Virginia public body. So when I say significant circulation, obviously Washington Post, published out of Washington, D.C., has a lot of circulation in Virginia. If they ask you a FOIA request, you respond to it. There are also times when discretion is the better part of valor. Let's say that you get a request for a bunch of documents because the Timmons group out of Greensboro is doing a phase 1 ESA, and so they want a bunch of information from community development. In theory, they could tell that person from Greensboro, no. But what are you going to do if you're actually thinking about this? Well, Timmons also has offices, several in the Commonwealth. And so what you're going to have happen about 10 minutes after you say no to them is somebody in their Richmond office is going to call up and ask for the same things, and they're going to be angry about it. So you might as well just use a little bit of common sense right there. For you as Board of Supervisors members, however, the most important thing for you to do when you get a FOIA document request is to get it written down and get it off your desk. Get it onto Celeste and Tiffany's desk, because they will take on the role of figuring out how to get that person the response that they need. But before you can know what to get onto their desk, you need to recognize when you're getting a request. So do we have to respond? This is important because you don't want to be tempted to simply dismiss something that's a legitimate FOIA request because you know the county doesn't have anything responsive to it. You always have to give some type of a response. And there are 4 responses that you're allowed to give by statute. You have one. Well, the very first thing you do is if there's going to be a charge, you need to tell the person there's going to be a charge and ask them if they want you to proceed. Go forth if they do. They can ask for an estimate at that point, depending on how much things are. There's a back and forth over making a deposit. But in general, if it's going to be a cost, you need to ask the person if they want you to proceed. You get back a yes. Okay, so now you have your 4 statutory responses.
You can respond, here are the documents. You can respond, there are no documents. However, but if you know of somebody else who has the documents, then you need to tell them, here's the other public body that has the documents. And this happens with us all the time. We get a request for documents and it turns out that they're in the custody of the DSS or the sheriff's office or the school division. So we respond, we say, hey, we don't have those, but the sheriff does. And here's the email address for the sheriff's FOIA clerk. Good luck to you. That's your response if you don't have anything, but you think somebody else might. Your third response is we are withholding some or all of the documents because they're exempt from disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. And I'll get to those exemptions in a moment. The last one is it's going to take us 7 more business days beyond the initial 5 business day period to give you a response. And this happens a lot. We just call it a 7-day letter. It's how often it happens. People ask for large amounts of documents, or they ask us for documents and it happens to be crunch time in whatever department on some project, and they just can't get back to the person within the 5 business day period. So then they say it's going to take us up to 7 more business days to give you a complete response to this. Now, if the response can't be completed, you typically work out an agreement to go even further beyond. You say, you know what, I'll give you the documents that I've got on a rolling production line. We have at one time had to go to court over this and ask the court to give us extra time, which the court did. Typically, if you can show the court a good reason why you need extra time, you're going to get it.
Mike, those issues are really between the requester and Celeste, right?
Typically, yeah. But you need to know, I'm making sure that you guys know what's going on behind the curtain, so to speak. I know that there are some citizens who might believe that we have staff sitting around waiting for FOIA requests to come in, but that is actually incorrect. We only have enough staff to do our jobs and sometimes not even that much. So FOIA has built in a provision that says that a public body can charge the actual cost or the reasonable approximation of fulfilling a request. A lot of times somebody calls up and asks for a copy of, oh, I'd like a copy of the comprehensive plan. Oh, I'd like a copy of last year's budget. Oh, I want a copy of the Board of Supervisors agenda from August. And you know what? You cut and paste a link or a document into an email and send it back, it would be more trouble to charge them for it than it is to forget about it. However, that's not always the case. So when they respond to a FOIA request, if they think that there's going to be a cost, they will tell the person, hey, this is going to cost you something, or it's probably going to cost you something unless it's easier than I think it is. So do you want me to continue? If they say yes, then you come up with an estimate for how much you think it's going to cost. And they will communicate with whatever department happens to be the custodian of the documents, come up with a combination of the copying or collation costs, the review costs, and other costs involved. You can actually charge the hourly wage of the person who does the work, provided that it is the lowest wage person who could reasonably have accomplished the work, and provide the response. If you think that that's going to be over $200, you can ask for a deposit of however much it's going to be. The sheriff at one point got in a request for, oh gosh, it was going to be well over 10,000 pages, and he was going to have to go through and figure out all the juveniles and redact them. So we actually did out the math and quoted a price to do all of that of well over $20,000. And it was defensible. It wasn't even a joke. That was how long it was going to take to do all the research and do all the juvenile redactions and address redactions and things that we were required by law to do. The person backed off once we explained this all to him, but you know, these things happen. Now, it's important to note that if someone hasn't paid for a previous FOIA request for at least 30 days, you don't have to respond to new FOIA requests from them until they've paid. So, what about really sensitive documents? It doesn't come as a shock to anybody sitting up here that just because you really think that something is sensitive, or you think that something, it would be really better for the county's financial position, or lots of other reasons, if it was private. FOIA, the statute, has a long list of different reasons why you can withhold documents from people. First thing is, it's always going to be liberally construed in favor of giving them the documents rather than withholding them. The second thing to know is that if you have documents that are partially subject to FOIA and partially not, you have to redact. So we have to go through and black out the parts that we can't provide to people. So somebody once told me there were 140 records exclusions in the Freedom of Information Act and other areas of the Virginia Code that say that you don't have to provide things under FOIA. The vast majority of them, however, fall into the category of things like answers to tests and exams at schools, confidential financial disclosures by potential concessionaires for the use of the Port of Virginia. They're of types like that. The biggies, the ones that are going to come up often for us, are going to be things like personnel information. Now, the personnel information exclusion, we used to think that it was fairly broad, that it covered a person's personnel file and other things that you would consider to be confidential as an employee of the county. It's actually was substantially narrowed in the case of Town of South Hill v. Hawkins. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but in that particular case, some citizens had filed a petition as well as various complaints against the town manager of the town of South Hill, and filed those directly with the town council, who of course is the town manager's supervisor. And somebody asked for copies of those, and the town council said, no, that's the town manager's personnel file. Of course not. And the Supreme Court of Virginia actually said that a lot of that documentation, although not all of it, was subject to disclosure as a personnel record. So it's actually a little bit shaky. The edges of that are more porous than you might think. However, it is quite clear that other than your overall salary and reimbursements, all of the, payroll records and personnel reviews are considered to be confidential, but there's a lot of stuff that's sort of around the edges of the personnel record that it's unclear right now. Work product or memoranda of legal counsel, things that would be traditionally attorney-client privileged, are exempt from FOIA. Proprietary information or trade secrets provided by an economic development prospect, if there's an NDA, that's why we do NDAs. Confidential information relating to a public contract, executive working papers of the county administrator. There was also a recent case on that out of the town of Culpeper. And memoranda prepared only for use in closed session. That's why you will on occasion see one of us provide to you a paper with 3 or 4 bullet points on it about some transaction that's being contemplated, that we hand to you in closed session, and then we collect it back up. Well, the reason why we do that is because it is a memorandum prepared only for use in closed session, and we don't want it to become a public record that's then subject to FOIA. So, FOIA officer. Thank you so much, Tiffany and Celeste. You make everybody's lives better.
Yes, you do.
When you get a FOIA request, get it off of your desk and onto theirs. They're going to make sure that they understand the request. If the request is in that gray area where they're not 100% sure they understand it, they're going to reach out to the person and confirm that they're going to get what they want and not be angry about getting a $210 bill when they should have got a $25 bill. They're going to calendar things so that you don't miss your 5 business day window to do a response. They're going to figure out what departments have the documents and connect with that department to figure it out. If there are difficult issues of interpretation, of whether an exemption applies or a confidentiality requirement applies, because sometimes you'll wind up with health records and things, particularly if somebody asks for documents from fire EMS. They have health records, and those can fall under the Health Records Privacy Act, which is a state law, or HIPAA. There's some difficult issues of interpretation that can come up. Just determine if any exclusions are applicable, redact the documents, try to make the requester happy or as happy as they can be within the bounds of what we can do. Now, things that we need to have on the website. We need to have the identities of our FOIA officers. We also need to file those with the State Freedom of Information Advisory Council. We need to have a statement of the rights of FOIA requesters, which we do have on our website. We need to have the dates, places, and times of public meetings. We need to have agendas and agenda packages on the website. We also need to put the minutes of meetings up within 7 days after those minutes are approved. So all of those things need to be up on the website. And I wanted to note that there was a statute that started off in the General Assembly this year, which would have provided, in effect, that you were unable, if an item was not on a published agenda for a meeting before the meeting started, you could not take action on it at the meeting of the public body, which is to say you couldn't have a walk-on item. It would be prohibited. You couldn't have a board member say, I want to add an agenda item to address this, because, well, you can't change the agenda if it's not on there. Thankfully, that bill is not going to become law in that form, because I think it would have made transaction of public business very difficult, particularly for bodies that are somewhat more loose. You all are fairly programmatic and well-planned. Not every public body is. However, as it is currently framed, and I believe it passed the Senate yesterday or today, instead it is likely to say that you must update your agenda if items are added potentially to the agenda between the initial time of publication and the beginning of the meeting. The agenda needs to be set at the beginning of the meeting, and that you won't take final action on anything unless it is time sensitive. So there are, of course, always going to be things that pop up at the last minute. There are always going to be administrative inadvertences where we say, oh, shoot, I forgot to put this contract on the agenda for approval. We got to get this done today so that we can send the notice to proceed next week, so that so on and so forth. That's still going to be legal, but we would actually, if that becomes law, we would have to go through, and if we have a walk-on item, make the finding that this needs to be done before the next board meeting. So, public meetings. This is the part that's probably more important for you. Anytime 3 or more members of a public body, or a quorum if less, although the only public bodies I know of where a quorum is less are the Highland County Board of Supervisors, which has only 3 members, and the Electoral Board, but there could be others, discuss public business simultaneously. That's a meeting. Now, I had a question from the members of a town council in a small town a few weeks ago. They said, you know what? We have a Bible study breakfast every Saturday morning
that three of the 7 of us attend. Is that a problem? I said, don't talk politics. You talking Jesus? Go for it. If you're talking politics, you need to stop yourself. And I had said, I understand that might make your Bible study difficult at times. And if that's the case, you're going to have to make choices about what you're going to do. I said, however, if you aren't talking turkey about public business, you can continue to meet. So it's important for people to be grown-ups and to police themselves. In order to hold a meeting, a lawful meeting, you need to give 3 business days notice. You have to provide notice on the website, in a prominent location, and in the office of the clerk, secretary, or chief administrator. Now we do that. This is yet another thing that get it onto Tiffany and Celeste's desk, because they will make sure, if you can tell them 3 or 4 days in advance, they will make sure it gets posted, and you don't have a problem. Notice of emergency, special, and continued meetings must be given to the press and public simultaneously with the members of the public body. We used to do continued meetings a lot more. Doing continued meetings almost doesn't make sense anymore. And this was an issue that I've seen come up recently. The reason why is that regardless, if you're going to have a continued meeting, like, oh, okay, we have a public hearing on a rezoning that goes until 11 o'clock and we decide we're coming back tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Okay, that's a continued meeting. But if you want to hold a meeting open until next week, you might as well just have a special meeting, because you're going to have to give the same notice either way. It makes very little difference. There does have to be minutes, unless it's in a purely advisory committee or commission. You have to have minutes of the meeting, and it has to be in an ADA accessible space. Yes, ma'am. Can she ask a question, Madam Chair?
Yes, of course.
Your bullet point is given to the press simultaneously with the members of the public body. Does that mean if it has to be noticed 3 days in advance? It's not like a public hearing type.
Correct.
Okay.
So what that means is, if you decide today that you're going to have a continued meeting, they need to clearly announce that, and then you need to do that posting. So, and it's on the website in a prominent location in the office of the clerk, secretary, chief administrator. And as you guys know, you also have to send notices to any citizens or media outlets that have asked for it. And typically they just want you to send them an email with a copy of the agenda. Not difficult to do, but you got to do it, right? So that's where that comes in. Electronic meetings. There are slightly different rules for advisory committees and non-decision-making groups. However, for a governing body like you, if you have a policy permitting it, and a physical quorum is assembled at one location, and a member has informed the chair of the situation, and one of 3 other things applies. The person has a disability or medical condition, or is taking care of another family member who has one so that they can't attend. If they live more than 60 miles from the meeting location, not really an issue for you, but you can see how somebody who was, let's say somebody who I suppose you could even see it happening with somebody who was on the RVARC board, let's say from Allegheny County, and was asked to come to Roanoke. They're more than 60 miles away. Or the member is unable to attend due to a personal matter, although they can do that no more than 2 meetings or 25% of the meetings rounded up, whichever is greater in any given year. You do have to, and the facts that it was a remote attendance do need to be recorded in the minutes, and the other members of the board need to vote to allow them to call in, the members of the assembled quorum,
Although the statute also strongly implies, it doesn't exactly say it, but it says that they need to cite the reason why the person's calling in violates the statute. So if you can't just say no because you don't want that person calling in and voting. You have to be saying, I don't think that person's actually sick. Hey, I think that person's calling in and they don't actually have a personal reason. They're not actually in Myrtle Beach. I have difficulty imagining anybody here ever doing that, or really any of my clients ever doing that. But I read in Cardinal News about some localities, and you never know with some folks. As you guys know, special notice for special meetings, rezonings, adoption and amendment of ordinances, budgets, bond issues, all sorts of things require sale of land. All sorts of things require special, lengthier notice and or public hearings. And if it wasn't done right, the action never legally happened, which became a real problem for the Board of Supervisors of Fairfax County when they held an all-electronic meeting under their emergency rules during COVID to adopt a comprehensive recodification of their zoning ordinance. And the Supreme Court of Virginia said, well, but COVID wasn't that bad, and you didn't really need to change your zoning ordinance. So we're striking it down. Of course, the county went and immediately proceeded advertising to readopt the zoning ordinance. But they did spend 2 years in litigation over it, and it was kind of annoying for them. So who can speak at a public meeting? People get to speak at a public meeting of the Board of Supervisors, but only at designated times and subject to rules, and sometimes only on particular topics. Citizens' comments and public hearings are controlled by rules. You have rules. It's got to be 3 minutes. You got to stand up and act at least passingly respectful. Basic things like that you expect people to do. It happens under the control of the chair. My recommendation is always to, when in doubt, let people talk. If a person is belligerent, if a person is having trouble keeping themselves under control, I don't see Captain Dillo here, but he's usually here to help out with that situation. In general, listening to somebody say something, even something that's really offensive, for 3 minutes is going to be far, far easier than sitting next to me for 3 hours in a deposition trying to explain to a hostile lawyer why you didn't. Word to the wise, you are not paid. You might be paid enough to sit there for 3 minutes and listen to a hostile or obscene person. You are not paid enough to sit in a deposition for 3 hours. Closed sessions. Of course, closed sessions are very important for guarding the public purse, for lack of a better way of doing it. You can't negotiate. It's very difficult to keep the elected officials whom the people of the county have elected to represent them and to make wise decisions on their behalf. It's very difficult for staff to keep you involved. It would be very difficult for staff to understand what the people of the county are telling you that they want and they need, particularly to make wise decisions with respect to land purchases and sales, negotiation of contracts, negotiations with potential employers or people investing in the county, negotiations about how the county is going to otherwise handle its money. When you're in those difficult negotiations, the people's representatives ought to be having some of that information presented. However, if that information were known to the entire world, that information would no longer have any value because your negotiating strategy would be destroyed. So we have certain exemptions under the Freedom of Information Act. I want to say there's something like 40 reasons to go into closed session, but a lot of them fall into the same sort of thing as the document exclusions. There's about a half dozen of them that you're going to hear on a regular basis, and those are very simple. To talk about specific personnel when you're going to name names. It's important to note, if you guys are going to talk about creating or funding a position, creating and funding a position is a public session item. Deciding who's going to fill that position is a closed session item. So it's very important to see that distinction. To consult with legal counsel, traditional attorney-client consultations, closed session. Economic development, you can go into closed session to discuss a previously unannounced economic development prospect or project. You can go into closed session to discuss a contract when discussion in open session would compromise your strategy. And again, the obvious example of purchase or sale of real estate. Every closed meeting has to be certified. We're all familiar with it. We're also all familiar with the fact that it's a roll call vote. And when you are being asked for that roll call, take a moment and be cognizant of it. You all are very, very good at not breaking the boundaries of what's appropriate for a closed session based upon the motions that you make and the topics that have been publicly declared to go into closed session to talk about. Part of the reason and part of the way that you stay conscientious about it is that you think about it for a second. Did we depart from FOIA? Was there something that you were worried about? The statute seems to say that you need to declare it at that time when you were asked in the roll call vote or forever hold your peace. There's actually a court case that said, oh no, the person can change their mind a month later and say that they thought that it really was a bad closed session. Your mileage might vary. Enforcement of FOIA is by a citizen lawsuit. It is not done by the Commonwealth's attorney. It is not done by the county attorney. Every once in a while, I get a call from John Alexander where he tells me that somebody said that he needs to prosecute the county for not giving them the document that they wanted. He usually tells me that he recommended to them a couple of fine members of our local bar. We have a good laugh and move on. Sometimes those members of the local bar then give one of us a phone call. In any event, normally the only relief that a petitioner is going to be able to get is an injunction or mandamus. And mandamus is an order to do for, both of those are just orders for you to do something, orders for you to produce a document, or orders for you not to break closed session rules again. There are also monetary penalties for breaking the closed session rules. So that's an issue. I want to note one area that has become an issue that many people ask about of late is how confidential is what's said in closed session? And I always emphasize to people that closed session should be a cone of silence unless and except it has been clearly agreed in the closed session that someone is going to have a conversation, or the county administrator or I have been given direction from you that you believe that within our responsibilities, it would be best for us to do X, Y, or Z. Of course, then what's said in closed session is going to have direct impacts on what we say or do. Closed session should be a cone of silence. There have been several localities around the state in the last 5 years that have censured and fined members who broke closed session confidentiality. That's really the only remedy there is, but It's happened a few times. And the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals says that it's just fine under the Due Process Clause and the First Amendment. So that's a thing that's out there. As far as ongoing training, Celeste and Tiffany have to do an annual training either with me or the FOIA Advisory Council, and it's about twice as long as this. So yet another reason they deserve gratitude. The FOIA Advisory Council will respond to questions from citizens and public officials, but they will not respond to questions that are in or close to litigation. And finally, all elected and some appointed officials have to take regular courses on FOIA, which is why you're here. That's the main stuff. There are a bunch of special rules that apply to law enforcement, special rules that apply to fire EMS, special rules that apply to commissioners and treasurers. I've focused on the rules that you as Board of Supervisors members need to know, both so that you can know what's going on behind the curtain of why they're hustling around trying to get things done, and also so that you can identify the basic ways that you have to make sure that you're holding meetings so that you stay out of trouble and don't suffer from accusations that you're inadvertently hiding your activities from the public. Is there anything else you need on that topic? Well, I thank you very much. It's been a wonderful organizational meeting. Congratulations, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. I will sit down and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lockaby. With no further business, I think we, yes. I'll read that. You got it, girl. Thank you. So with no further business, I am going to remind everyone that Tiffany is blocking the exit. So we will do our required photographs before we can leave. And we will be in recess until February 10th, 2025 at 4 p.m. at the Greenfield Education Center in Daleville, where we will participate in a work session with the Planning Commission on the County Comprehensive Plan. Thank you.
You know, I'd ask Laura, well, I guess Nicole too, of a copy of what is planned to be spoke on that day and fed to us and digested.
We have it like a free agenda.
Yeah, but I haven't seen a thing. So I'm kind of coming in cold on these meetings, without something, it's hard to take it all in.